Ruslan.
Jordan Peterson sat down with Piers Morgan, got pressed on his belief in God and whether or not he believes in the afterlife, and made this bold claim that even atheists have to believe in this one miracle. All right, so I'm excited to jump into this conversation. First of all, before we get into the miracle claim, let me just point out this definition that they're talking about. That they're talking politics and all kinds of other stuff here that's pretty interesting. But this one point that Dr. Jordan Peterson makes about
that I tried not to offer any explanations of the biblical text that weren't also fully justifiable from a scientific perspective, and usually from multiple different orientation places on the scientific side.
So this is why he won't answer certain questions, in my opinion, and I haven't read the book, but I'm going to, with regards to the virgin birth and regards to the miracle stories, because he doesn't know how to reconcile those from a scientific endeavor, if that makes sense. Right now, he has affirmed that, you know, the bodily resurrection happened. He has affirmed that he believes in an afterlife with his conversation with Greg Laurie. He's affirmed, he said in his conversation with the country star, I can't remember, maybe you guys could help me in the chat or in the comments, that he gave his life to Jesus a long time ago. Someone else mentioned in the comments that the end of his maps of meaning ultimately points to Jesus. I don't know, but it sure does sound like he's made a lot of verbal affirmations of the Christian doctrines that we would say you got to believe these things to be in.
And so why wouldn't the spirit of adventure take us out into the world in the most glorious possible manner? Like, what the hell else would it possibly be for?
Yeah.
Okay, now let me go to this timestamp, and this is Piers Morgan, again, pressing him specifically on his belief in God, and he kind of gives the same kind of answer, which is like, well, what do you mean by belief? What do you mean by God, right? So on and so forth, even though earlier he defined what he means by God. But check this out.
Obviously, you've just written a whole book about the Bible, about God, about all of this. When I finished it, I couldn't work out whether you actually believe in God. And
this is, I got to own this. This is something I was wrong about. I thought that in this book, Dr. Jordan Peterson was going to come out as clearly articulating his beliefs and that he does believe in God. So I'm bummed that he didn't. And again, I haven't read the book yet. Piers Morgan is saying he did not land and give a clear position on where he is with God. I presume that he is already there, but Piers Morgan says it's still ambiguous at the end of the book, which I think is a bummer.
Whether you think there is, personally think there is, for example, a heaven. You've obviously had to give this, through the death of your parents, a lot of thought, I would imagine. What is the reality? I mean, do you believe there is do you believe in God? Do you think there is a heaven? Is that where you think they've gone to?
You know, Piers, I would say that I leave the things that are beyond my comprehension outside the realm of my comprehension, and I try to understand what I can understand. I certainly believe that we can produce hell on earth.
So again, remember, in the conversation with Greg Laurie, he did say he does believe everything Greg Laurie believes about a literal heaven and a new earth. Here he's saying, I leave those things outside of my comprehension.
And we have, in many ways. I've certainly had experiences that indicated to me that the reestablishment of the Garden of Eden on earth is a possibility, and that you can live like that. How those things are related to what's eternal is beyond me. I think like it's beyond everyone. And I believe that with sufficient faith that you walk with God through the valley of the shadow of death. I think that's true. I think that if you're courageous and you confront the worst life has to offer, that the spirit of your ancestors walks with you. What that means in the final analysis with regards to the relationship between the finite and the eternal, I don't know. I don't know. I can feel eternity touching the mundane life in the confines of my own life, and I try to make that welcome, and that works. Everything else that I think I've written or spoken about, and there's nothing hidden. You know, I'm trying to take people along my own explorations and discovery and sharing what I've come to understand.
Very interesting, right? Especially considering, I mean, the miracles his wife has experienced. He says he probably would say that he experienced some form of miracle in terms of his own health and almost dying. His father recently passed 3 weeks ago. Piers Morgan actually gets him to cry in this. So it's interesting, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe he's just sharing his journey and exactly where he is.
I can tell you with regards to studying the biblical texts that the more I study them, the more they reveal. That seems inexhaustible, and it's been unbelievably useful. Like writing this book was ridiculously useful. I learned so much. I'm still adjusting to the things that I've learned. And I certainly do believe as well that it's by no means chance that the most functional societies in the world are predicated upon the biblical text. That's not, there's a direct causal relationship there. Not least because
just on that,
Go ahead.
Did the book give you a greater sense of faith? I mean, did it make you, in a way, more religious as you read more and more?
Shout out to Emily. Emily made an interesting observation. She said, if you listen closely, he's only interested in the individual's ability to emulate Jesus, not what Jesus did that we couldn't do for ourselves. Interesting observation in terms of Jesus's imputed righteousness to us, justification by grace through faith. Yeah, I could see that. I think that's a fair analysis in terms of this. But again, I haven't read the book, so I almost want to sit and see, what does he say about salvation? What does he say about justification? What does he say about Jesus and the implications of the resurrection on this side of eternity?
Christianity Today reviewed your book and said,
okay, now this is a pretty scathing review from Christianity Today, which basically, I mean, it kind of says like, yeah, he's not all the way there. Very interesting. But before we get into that, I got to make sure you guys know about our biggest sale yet. The Bless God Black Friday sale is here. We have 25 all the way up to 50% off on select items, and we've brought back some of your favorite collections from the past several years. But this sale isn't just bringing back the old collections. I now have my very first ever 60-day devotional available right now. It's called the Occupy Till I Come, and it takes you through the entire narrative of Scripture in 60 days, 35 days in the Old Testament, 25 days in the New Testament, with custom journal prompts for you to write in every single day. Head over to blessgod.shop right now to get the discipleship bundle, where you'll get a prayer journal, our leadership planner, and my brand new devotional with a total of 58% off its entire retail value. While buying fun things and getting great deals during the holiday season is nice, buy something for yourself and a friend that's actually going to deepen and help you grow in your faith. Piers Morgan brings up the Christianity Today book review. This is fascinating.
Christian readers should learn from Peterson's boldness, his disposition of awe, and docility before the sacred page. However, the question of God is unavoidable. Peterson is slippery on this point. Familiar words from Christian doctrine like creation and redemption and resurrection mean something altogether different when Peterson uses them. They're kind of suggesting...
Okay, how do they know that he means those words differently? If he's using those words, which again, I haven't read the book, I'm excited to read it, how do they know if he is using those words differently? Because if he's talking about creation, redemption, resurrection, and they're just assuming he's not using those words the same, interesting.
You go right to the point of saying you believe in God and that you're a fully paid up God believer, if you like, for want of a better phrase, but you don't quite cross that line. Is that where you are? I mean, if you say you've had a sort of...
Well, no, I don't think so. I think the first thing I would say is that, no, there's a continual insistence in the biblical text that God is outside of understanding, outside of our understanding, right? So whatever God is beyond the categories, even of real and unreal. And that's not my interpretation of the text. I mean, even Moses only gets a glimpse of God's back. And so we have to always remember that we're talking about something that in the final analysis we don't understand. But then I would also say, I don't believe that belief means what most people think when they say belief.
That's a mouthful. I don't believe belief means what most people say when they mean belief. What does he mean? What does it mean? It means that he is looking at the James definition of belief, right? Faith without works is dead, okay? So he is taking a very pragmatic approach to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. I think the part where perhaps he's ambiguous on is the other half of that verse. For it is God doing the work in you and giving you the desire to do and obey his will. This is a great way to, in my opinion, that really exemplifies the simplicity of all this. That I don't think it's that confident. I don't think it's that complicated. Dear friends, you always followed my instructions when I was with you, and now that I am away, it is even more important. Work hard to show the results of your salvation. So I think Jordan Peterson is really into the belief means change, transformation, living different, action, right? I think that's those are good things, but this is the part where I think we miss, right? Work hard to show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear, for God, verse 13, is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. We are called to work out our salvation with fear and trembling before the world, let our light shine, obey God, care for the widow, care for the orphan, yes and amen. But the second part of this passage is, for God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. This is what I would argue is the salvation process, right? The salvation, justification, being born again, something lights up inside of you, and all of a sudden you have a desire and the power to do the things that please God. Hopefully this is making sense. This is the belief aspect. Like, we believe that God transforms us from the inside out. A lot of what's happening in the world is a desire to have outside in transformation. But this is an inside out transformation. My identity is transformed, therefore I behave differently.
And I think that religious faith in the most fundamental sense is the willingness to hoist your cross joyfully as you trudge uphill. And that's not the same thing as declaiming about what you assume propositionally to be true. And, you know, Christ in the Gospel says, not all those who say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. It's like, belief is a very complicated issue. And I think the best way that you infer your knowledge about someone's belief is watching how they conduct themselves.
Yeah, I would say it's yes and. I say yes and that if there are realities about realms that impact our present reality, that there is something beyond just the physical world that transforms us spiritually. And that then causes us to walk that out. So I would say it's yes and. I don't know if Jordan Peterson would disagree. This would be something I'd want to go deeper with him on.
Not what they say. The Pharisees in the gospel text proclaim their belief constantly.
So I guess it's difference between proclaiming your belief and actually having genuine belief, because one can proclaim belief and not have belief. That's what I would say the Pharisees were. They proclaimed belief, but did they actually believe? Did all of them believe? Or was it convenient and cultural? I understand the apprehension towards easy believism and cultural baggage, but I think there's something to belief that is also beneficial. Now, let's get into this Richard Dawkins bit.
I've interviewed Richard Dawkins several times, and I always say to him, you know, it's interesting. I said, because you cannot explain to me, Richard Dawkins, for example, what was there before nothing? You know, what was there before nothing? Because the human brain can't comprehend what that even means, there has to be a superior power to a human being out there somewhere that can make sense of all that.
Right.
And that's why, look, I believe in God. I was raised as a Catholic. But the Catholic Herald said of your debate there was no meeting of minds. They were forced to agree their minds were differently constructed. There was no merging of reality. And it seems to me, probably, if you have me, you, and Dawkins in the same room, you've got the three components there. You've got one person, me, who's an absolute unequivocal believer. You've got you that I suspect is nudging that way, but it's not quite there in the way that I am. And you've got Dawkins, who's completely implacably opposed to any sense that there could possibly be anything other than what's staring him in front of his eyes.
Yeah, I think Jordan's much closer to where Piers is than where Dawkins is. He kind of made it seem like he's right in the middle. I think he's much closer, if I'm being honest with you guys.
Would that be fair?
Well, I'd say a couple of things about that. The first is that even the scientific accounts for materialist reality require one miracle to get...
Sheesh. Run it back. Run it back. Listen closely.
Even the scientific accounts for materialist reality require one miracle to get going. For example, it's a truism among cosmologists that the laws of time and space, the laws of science, break down at the singularity. And there's no difference between saying that and saying something that we can't explain from within the confines of our materialist understanding emerged at the origin to bring all things into being. There's a miracle lurking in there somewhere. And of course, the biologists are also stuck with the problem of the origin of life.
I mean, Joe Rogan said scientists always say, give us one miracle and we'll explain the universe to you, right? And so we're just saying, yeah, and that miracle is God created the universe. We're just going one step further.
Which they hand wave about constantly, but have been completely unable to account for. And so my friend Jonathan Pajot, his insistence is that if he's going to accept a miracle, he'll accept the miracle that proclaims that the cosmos itself is founded on sacrifice. And that's a completely different framework of conceptualization that I unpack to a large degree in my book, because you can make a very strong case that perception itself is a sacrificial endeavor. And so Dawkins' metaphysics is very narrowly empirical and very narrowly enlightenment. And part of the problem with that is that
He said narrowly, narrowly empirical.
there are also just things that Dawkins doesn't know. And I would say in his favor and in the favor of our discussion is that near the end of that discussion, we did have a meeting of minds because we started to talk about how the evolution of narrative in the manner that he represented as memes could have a long-term effect on the genetic evolution of humanity. And he got very excited about that. And I was thrilled about that because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Dawkins is because I think some of his ideas, especially the idea of meme, has far more significance than he thinks it does.
Right.
Now, part of the problem is there's a whole literature that Richard Dawkins knows nothing about. So, for example, he doesn't know anything about the work of a man named Mircea Eliade, who was the preeminent historian of religion for years. He's out of favor in academia because he's not a postmodern, hedonistic, power-mad nihilist. And, you know, Eliade was one of those people who thinks that there was something fundamental about the structure of mythology and narrative. And Dawkins doesn't know anything about that entire field of endeavor. And that's a major problem, given that he's also very concerned with the evolution of our ability to abstract. And I was trying to move the discussion in that direction, and that happened very successfully near the end of it.
Wow. So that's fascinating. So a couple things. One, we talk about belief and what is belief and the potential dichotomy there. I don't think there needs to be a dichotomy there. I think belief is something that is a form of affirmations while also a practice of said form of affirmations, right? If I believe that I have the ability to wrap up this stream, get in the car, drive to San Diego, I have the practical aspect that that's what I'm going to do. It starts with a thought, starts with an idea, and then it materializes itself. That's a form of belief, if you will, right? Or a confidence spectrum. So I think it's and both. We looked at that passage earlier. Then he goes on to say, you know, which we all know, that give us one miracle, we'll explain the world to you. And then he goes on to say, well, the issue with Dawkins is that he just doesn't have a robust understanding of the memes and the meaning and the archetypes and the symbolic nature that affects reality and people's perception and these stories that we have to live out. And I would argue at the origin of all these stories, the origin of why we like certain films and these heroes' journeys that our brains naturally fall in love with is because we're intrinsically built with the gospel, or rather with the law of God written on our hearts. Right? Ecclesiastes says that eternity is written on our hearts. Romans 2 talks about how the Gentiles who didn't have a law were a law unto themselves. That's, you could say, the human conscience, or I would say it's something deeper than that. It's a yearning and a desire for something greater than oneself. And so I think this conversation was interesting. I think Piers Morgan and Jordan Peterson have a pretty cool synergy to themselves. And I'm really curious where this goes. I'm excited to read We Who Wrestle with God. Don't want you guys to miss, we just launched our Black Friday sale, the biggest sale ever, okay? Happening right now. Go check it out. blessgod.shop. Link is pinned up. Get my brand new devotional. You get the pack, the discipleship pack. It's phenomenal. All right. For far too long, the bar for Christians has been set low. More Christians are skipping church, watching online, too busy for group, and not serving in their local church communities. They go about their lives not feeling connected to Jesus, and in turn, their salvation goes unnoticed by their unsaved peers. They've become indistinguishable from the world around them. We need to shift from asking, what is the bare minimum I can do for Christ, and start asking, what would it look like to live a life entirely devoted to Him? 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 describes a life that seems to have been forgotten. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. So join me and my favorite pastors, podcasters, and performers March 27th through 29th at the Bless God Summit in Southern California, and discover your personal ministry, calling, and purpose when living in complete devotion to Jesus.